They said no man ever came back from Tumbleweed County once the salt wind found his name. That night, the wind carried mine. The rain had been chasing me for hours, hard, cold, the kind that cuts through your coat and your pride. My horse limped, my hands were stiff, and the lantern I carried was dying the way a man dies, slow, stubborn, refusing to go quietly. When I finally saw a light one yellow window burning in all that wet black, it looked less like salvation and more like temptation. The door opened before I even knocked. She was standing there, still as stone, a rifle resting easy against her hip. The kind of woman the desert made and the town forgot, hair silvered by stormlight, eyes sharp enough to hold their own court. "Lost your road?" she asked. I swallowed the word yes before it could sound weak. "Need a place to wait the storm," I said instead. She looked me over, slow and measuring boots, mud, beard, lies. Then she said it, quiet but clear as thunder. "You can stay, but not as a stranger." The pause between her words and my breath was the longest second of my life. "What's that mean, ma'am?" Her thumb brushed the rifle's stock like she was remembering a lover. "It means this roof's for a husband, not a drifter. You want my fire, you take my name tonight." I laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound was bitter and lonely and didn't last long. "Lady, I'm half dead, not half crazy." She didn't flinch. Just lifted her chin, and in that moment, the thunder rolled close enough to shake the window. "Then right into it," she said, "but the storm's worse than me." Behind her, the fire crackled, warm and steady. Behind me, the wind howled like a warning. Between us, one breath, one choice. I took off my hat, slow. "You always pick husbands out of the rain?" Her voice softened just enough to sound human. "Only the ones too proud to ask for help." That's how it started, not with a kiss, not with love, but with a deal made in the middle of God's punishment. They call it the night May Delaney caught herself a husband. But that's not the truth. That night, two people who'd already lost everything tried to outstare their own loneliness, and one of them blinked first. The next morning came, like it always does, in the high desert, too bright, too honest. The storm had crawled off somewhere over the horizon, leaving behind a silence so thick it almost hummed. I woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the burnt mud I'd been boiling on the trail. It was sitting there on the table, one tin cup, one plate, no words. She was outside already, boots on, coat buttoned, checking the fence line. That's how May Delaney was built, all distance and direction. You could tell a lot about a person by the way they looked at their land. She didn't see beauty, she saw boundaries, things to protect, things to lose. The fence, the salt fields, the crumbling barn, they were her kingdom, and she wore it like a crown of thorns. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to say good morning. You work, you stay, you steal, you hang, simple as that. I nodded. "Fine by me." "Name?" "Caleb Hart." Lear's name. "Only one I got." She didn't smile, but her eyes flickered like someone trying to remember how. The Delaney Ranch sat on land that used to be a sea long before men with shovels turned salt into silver. Her late husband had built an empire off it, selling purity to people who'd never tasted dust. But empires fall the same way they rise, with greed and gossip. When the old man died, half the county swore May had done it herself. They called her the widow of Tumbleweed. Some said she poisoned him. Others said she just waited him out. Truth was, she never corrected them. In this country, silence is safer than begging to be believed. Days fell into rhythm fence repairs, hauling salt, keeping the generator alive. Nights, I slept in the bunkhouse. The wind never stopped out here. It moved through the walls like memory. Sometimes, I'd hear her pacing the main room, boots creaking against the old oak floor. Sometimes, she'd hum low, almost like she was afraid of the sound of her own tenderness. She didn't ask where I came from, and I didn't offer. But secrets have a way of smelling through the cracks. One afternoon, the sheriff showed up, a small man with a big belt buckle and an even bigger mouth. "Heard you picked up a stray," he said, tipping his hat. "You might want to check who you're feeding." May didn't flinch. "He works for his food. That's all I need to know." The sheriff looked at me, chewing his toothpick slow. "Name's Caleb Hart, huh? Heard that one before. Fella by that name deserted the cavalry, left his captain bleeding near Red Rock." The wind stopped for half a second. May didn't blink. "Then I guess I better keep him busy." so he don't run again. The sheriff smirked. Suit yourself, just don't say I didn't warn you. When he left, she turned to me. That true? I tightened my jaw. Truth doesn't change what I did. I left when the killing stopped making sense. She looked at me long enough for judgment to soften into something else, maybe understanding, maybe just exhaustion. Everybody leaves something, she finally said. The question is, did you take the worst part of it with you? That night, she came out to the porch where I was fixing a broken lantern. The desert moon painted everything silver, her hair, the salt flats, even her silence. My husband used to say this land would outlive love, she said. I used to believe him. What do you believe now? I asked. She sipped from her flask, then handed it over. That love and land rot the same way when nobody tends to them. We didn't talk after that. Didn't need to. Out there, words were just another kind of dust they got in your teeth, and didn't change much. Weeks passed. The storm had left behind puddles that dried into mirrors, the kind that show you exactly how alone you are. Every morning, May was up before sunrise, walking the fence line with a rifle and a limp. I never asked about the limp, and she never offered a story. Out here, pain was a kind of privacy. But the quiet between us started to change shape. It wasn't the cold kind anymore. It was something like peace, or the closest thing two broken people can find to it. Some nights, she'd leave an extra lamp burning outside the house. In case you need the light, she'd say, pretending it was nothing. I never told her I stayed up just to watch it go out. Work has a way of teaching two people what words never can. By the third week, we'd settled into a rhythm. She'd point, I'd fix. She'd frown, I'd nod. The fences got straighter, the water tank stopped leaking, and the house, once half empty of sound, started breathing again. Not with laughter, not yet, but with movement. May Delaney didn't ask for company. She asked for things to be done right, and in her world, that was the closest thing to affection. Sometimes, when the sun hit the salt flats just right, I'd catch her standing still, eyes far off, as if she were measuring her life by horizons she could never reach. There was a calm in those moments, and I'd feel something shift, a kind of peace I hadn't earned, but was borrowing for a while. One evening, I found her in the old greenhouse, half collapsed, glass panes broken by years of wind. She was brushing dust off a withered rose bush, its stems blackened, its roots dry as bone. Used to be my husband's pride, she said quietly. Said flowers make a house softer. Guess we both hardened faster than they did. She looked at me then, like she was testing if I knew what grief costs a person. I didn't say a word. I just knelt beside her, poured what little water I had from my canteen over the roots. She didn't thank me, just nodded once and whispered, "Don't waste it." That night, she left a slice of cornbread on my workbench. No plate, no note. Just a gesture that said more than an apology ever could. From that day on, something unspoken took root between us, a kind of quiet pact. We didn't name it, didn't dare, but it was there, built on small mercies. I'd sharpen her knives when she wasn't looking. She'd patch the tear in my shirt and pretend it was laundry day. Out here, kindness was dangerous. It meant you had something left to lose. The folks in town started to notice. At the general store, whispers trailed me like dust. That drifter's still at the widow's place, huh? Heard she pays him in ways no one else can. Poor fool doesn't know he's just her next ghost. I learned to keep my eyes down and my temper steady. But every time I rode back, the ranch felt less like a job and more like, I don't know, some place that didn't want me dead. Then one morning, while mending the corral, May brought me a letter. It was old, edges yellowed, sealed in wax. Found this in the desk, she said. Addressed to you. I stared at the name scrawled across it, Caleb Hart. My throat closed. I don't take mail, I muttered. Didn't figure you did, she said, setting it down anyway. It was from the army. Probably a warning. Probably forgiveness dressed up as punishment. I never opened it. I just threw it into the stove that night, watched the paper curl into orange memory. She saw me do it. Didn't stop me. When the flames died, she said, you burn in guilt doesn't mean it's gone. I know, I said, but it don't get to live here either. Her eyes softened then, and for the first time, her voice carried something that wasn't command. You talk like a man who's been running too long. Oh, and you talk like someone who never stopped guarding the door. Silence again, but this time it didn't bite. Days passed, and that rose bush started showing green. Just a sprout, fragile as breath. May pretended not to notice, but she watered it at dusk, always when she thought I wasn't watching. That's how our healing started, quiet, awkward, invisible, to anyone who believed redemption had to be loud. Then came the night of the cattle raid. Bandits from across the border. I woke to gunfire and shouting. By the time I reached the yard, May was already out there, rifle in hand, bare feet in the mud, eyes like steel catching lightning. She fired once, twice. The men scattered, and the silence that followed was thick with adrenaline and fear. "You could have been killed," I said, chest heaving. She looked at me and smirked. "So could you." I wanted to say more, to tell her that maybe we'd both been dead long before tonight, but the words got stuck behind everything else I hadn't said. She wiped the mud from her cheek with the back of her hand, handed me the rifle. "Next time, shoot first. I hate being late to my own rescue." We laughed, and it was strange how wrong it sounded and how right it felt. After that night, she let me stay in the main house. "It's just warmer," she said, but her eyes betrayed something gentler. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a fragile kind of belonging. A home made not from walls, but from people brave enough to stop pretending they didn't need one. By the time summer dragged its boots across Tumbleweed County, the wind had learned our names. It carried them to town and tossed them into every open mouth. Folks swallowed us whole, then spit us out into stories they liked better than the truth. It started small, like all infections do. A chuckle at the feed store. A whisper under a church hat. The preacher's wife said she didn't traffic in rumors, which is the fastest way to drive a rumor to market. The widow Delaney's gone and bought herself a man. Someone announced at the barber's, like reading weather off the sky. By evening, the general store had it itemized. What I cost, what I did, what I was. By morning, the paper caught the fever. The Tumbleweed Chronicle ran it above the fold, ink thick as judgment. Salt Queen snag stray, ranch becomes den of sin. There was a sketch of May's house that made it look like a courthouse married a gallows. Underneath, my name, or something trying to be my name. Desertion. Red Rock. A captain bleeding into dust. May read the paper at the kitchen table, not with shock, not with anger, just the stillness of a person who's been through this rodeo enough times to recognize the music. She lay the page flat, smoothed the crease, and looked past me, out the window, where the salt flats lay white as accusation. "Town's hungry again," she said. "For what?" I asked, though we both knew. "A woman to punish," she said. "Or a man to hang. Sometimes both, if the Lord's generous." That Sunday the sermon got pointed. The preacher's voice rolled out like a storm that already knew where it was going. "Temptation dresses as charity," he warned, "and the devil loves a house with no husband." People nodded, the way folks nod at anything that doesn't cost them. After the service, the sheriff shook hands down the aisle and found me where I wasn't hiding. His smile had more teeth than warmth. "Caleb Hart," he said, tasting the name. "Or whatever you're calling yourself this season." "Same name. Same man," I said. He shrugged. "Paper says you left your post at Red Rock." Captain blid out. "Hard thing to outrun. Harder thing to live with," I said. He let that hang between us, a coat nobody wanted to claim. Then he leaned in, breath sweet with church mints. "Town council's meeting Tuesday. There's talk about vagrancy, trespass, moral blight. You ain't married to the lady, you ain't kin to the land. Makes you removable." "What's the law say?" I asked. He tapped his badge. "Law says what the loudest room says." He left his meaning on my boots like mud. That afternoon, the Chronicle sent a boy to our gate with a list of questions that weren't questions. "Is it true you took the widow's bed?" he asked, rehearsed and red-eared. May stood beside me, hands in her coat pockets, watching him with a quiet that could freeze water. "We don't answer to children or to paper," she said, then shut the gate easy, like mercy. But mercy doesn't sell. By the next day, the paper had found a source close to the family, who wasn't close and wasn't family. They printed a marriage license number that didn't exist. And, for seasoning, They pasted a quote from scripture upside down. Folks loved it anyway. Pressure has a sound. Sometimes it's a kettle. Sometimes it's a church bell that won't quit. At our place, it sounded like wood cracking in the heat. Fences we'd mended started to bow. Pumps we'd primed coughed like old men. Every break demanded 2 sets of hands to fix, which meant 2 bodies close enough to smell each other's fear. We worked, we ate, we slept. The long, clean quiet we'd been building felt thin as paper. I kept looking for where the rip would start. It started at the dining table. No paper, no sermon. Just May, the way a cliff starts sudden and absolute. "We could end this," she said, like naming a chore. "Make it legal. Shut their mouths with ink." "Marry?" I asked, though the word already sat heavy in the room. "On paper," she said. "For the land. For your right to stand here without a badge measuring your breath." I set my fork down. Food turned to sawdust in my mouth. "You want a husband the way a house wants a brace?" I said. "A beam, not a man." She didn't flinch. "I want the talking to stop." "The talking never stops," I said. "It just changes keys." Her eyes did this thing, then hardened to glass, and then, for a heartbeat, flashed something softer behind it. "I am tired, Caleb. Tired of being a circus for small lives. Tired of waking up to a town already inside my house." I could have said yes. Could have taken the pen, signed my name, put a lock on a door that had been open too long. It would have made sense to anybody who counts by dollars and deeds. But sense ain't the same as peace. "What if I leave?" I asked, voice low, as if saying it softer would make it a smaller sin. "Take myself out of their mouths. You keep the land. Keep your name clean. M." She looked past me again at the flats, at the sky, at a horizon that had held her together for years. "You leaving doesn't quiet them," she said. "It just gives them a new ending." We let the night settle between us like dust. I slept on the parlor floor and listened to the house think aloud. The old pipes clacking, the wind grating the eaves. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I heard her moving through rooms, stopping at doors like a soldier counting exits. When the first thin line of daylight found the window, she had a stack of papers on the table, neat, white, terrible. "Marriage by civil contract," she said. "No rights to my estate, no rights to me. It just gives you blood in the land. Protects the both of us from the loudest room." "You drawing up a fence or a vow?" I asked. "Call it a quiet," she said, sliding the pen across. "I'm buying us quiet." Buying. There it was, the part of the plan that caught on bone. I picked up the pen. It was heavier than it should have been, like history had climbed inside it. My name hovered over the line, waiting to fall. "Do you trust me?" I asked. She didn't look away. "I don't trust crowds," she said. "I trust what we've done with our hands, and I trust that you want rest as much as I do." The window rattled. A dust devil chased itself across the yard. I could hear the sheriff's minty breath, the preacher's thunder, the paper's ink. I could hear my captain at Red Rock telling me a man becomes what he signs. "I won't be your brace," I said. "Not if it means I stop being a man." Her jaw tightened. "And I won't be your cover," she answered, "for running from the part of you that wants to stay." We stood there, 2 people swallowing pride like bad medicine. The pen lay between us, the cheapest weapon in the county. The council met that Tuesday in a hall that smelled like varnish and self-importance. We sat through numbers and nods until our names came up, and then the room got brighter, like a match had been struck. The sheriff recited a paragraph about moral nuisance. The preacher added one about the sanctity of homes. The paper's man took notes like he was measuring our journey to hell in inches. "Who are you to each other?" a councilman asked. Fingers steepled. Face church. Smooth. May answered before I could. "We are caretakers," she said, "of land, of work, of what decency's left when folks stop looking." "That won't do," the councilman replied. "Caretaker ain't a family word." In the end, they didn't vote. They adjourned pending documentation, which is how cowards say, "Bring us proof, and we'll call it truth." On the ride home, dust climbed into my teeth. The sun dropped behind the flats and turned the salt to bleeding glass. May rode ahead, her back straight, her hat pulled low. She looked exactly like what they called her, a widow of everything. At the gate, she handed me the contract again. Didn't speak. Didn't ask. just held it out like a rope to a man in water. I took it and felt something inside me lean over a cliff. May, I said, and my voice came out like gravel. If I sign this, I'll be your quiet, but I won't be your peace. She blinked, once. Slow. I never asked you to be my peace, she said. I asked you to stay. The pen waited. The sky waited. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I set the contract down on the fence post. The paper bent a little, same as everything does under weight. I can't be bought, I said. Not even by the silence I've been praying for. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like someone who'd spent her life building doors and couldn't believe one had just walked away from its hinges. Then ride, she said quietly. No rifle, no thunder, just a tired woman telling a tired man what the weather already had. The storm of tongues had done its work. It had scraped us down to the bone where decisions tell the truth. And the truth was this. Power can buy quiet, but it can't buy belonging. And a man can run from noise all his life and still never find the kind of silence that lets him breathe. Night came fast. I saddled up slow. Somewhere behind me, a greenhouse waited on a rose that had remembered how to live. Somewhere inside me, a war I hadn't finished was waiting to be named. I didn't look back. Dawn came pale and careless, spreading thin light over the salt flats, as if it didn't know what it had witnessed. My horse was already packed when I stepped onto the porch. Behind me, the house stood quiet. Windows shut like eyelids after a long night of crying. The contract I hadn't signed lay on the fence post. Edges curled from dew. May Delaney was at the gate before I reached it. No rifle this time, no sharpness. Just her coat drawn tight and that half-tired grace she wore when pride ran out. She looked smaller in the morning. Maybe we both did. You really leaving, she said. Only thing I ever been good at. She studied me a long beat. The town'll think they won. I met her eyes. They always do. Till they need someone to fix what's broke. We stood like that, distance measured in breaths. Then she held out something small, a folded scrap of paper, yellowed, creased. He wrote it before he died, she said. My husband. Thought you should have it. I frowned. Why me? Because it's about men who run from mercy, she said. And I'm tired of reading it alone. I didn't open it. Couldn't. I slid it into my pocket and swung into the saddle. She didn't stop me, didn't curse, didn't bless. Just turned and walked back to the house, each step heavier than thunder. The road out of Tumbleweed ran straight for 20 miles before bending toward nowhere. The wind came hard from the north, carrying the kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's punishment. My horse's hooves left dark prints that the sun hurried to erase. By noon, the flats behind me looked like a mirage I'd already dreamed. I stopped by a dry creek bed, built a small fire, boiled coffee that tasted like rust. The letter burned a hole in my pocket until I gave in. It was short. If you ever read this, it means I'm gone, and you've survived another man's silence. Don't spend the rest of your life proving you can do everything alone. It's a lie this land tells us that strength means solitude. It doesn't. It just means no one will see when you fall. The signature at the bottom was smudged, maybe by water, maybe by time. I folded it back, hands shaking harder than the wind. That's when I realized what she'd given me wasn't forgiveness, it was a mirror. I'd been running from Red Rock, from the captain I left bleeding, from the men who called me coward, from every voice that told me belonging meant surrender. And somewhere between the flats and the fire, I'd mistaken motion for redemption. The horizon shimmered with heat. In that wavering line, I thought I saw her figure a trick of light, a ghost in daylight standing by the fence, not waiting, just existing. That vision stayed until it hurt to look. 2 nights later, I reached a town called Bitterwell. It wasn't much, one saloon, one church, too many drunks for a place without hope. I traded my saddle knife for a room and a bottle, sat by the window, listening to the boards creak under other people's sins. The barkeep was talkative, the way lonely men are when they smell another drifter. Where you coming from? He asked. Nowhere worth naming. He laughed. Then you'll fit right in. He slid me a newspaper. Week old, edges torn. The headline bled across the top. Freak flood hits Delaney Saltworks. Owner missing. The bottle stopped halfway to my lips. Beneath the headline, a sketch her face. Not drawn cruel this time, but solemn, as if the artist had finally seen the woman instead of the myth. The report said the flood came without warning, the earth beneath the salt collapsing like lungs giving up. They found horses drowned, fences twisted. No sign of May. I read it twice, then again, until the words blurred into rain. I left before sunrise. Didn't pay, didn't look back. The road home wasn't the same one I'd left. It never is. Storms had carved new scars across the land, and the sky smelled like iron. I rode until the salt flats rose on the horizon, pale and endless, shining under the morning like a grave made of light. The ranch was half gone. The barn had folded in on itself, walls warped by water. Of course she did. The sheriff found me hours later. He didn't have his badge on, just a hat too clean for work. "You came back," he said. "Guess I did." He looked at the mess, at the rose, at me. No sign of her. Might have been swept downriver. Or might not, I said. He nodded slow, like a man who knows better than to argue with faith. "You plan to stay?" I looked around. The land was wounded, but still breathing. "She used to say love and land rot the same way," I said. "Maybe that means they heal the same too." The sheriff tipped his hat and left me with the quiet. That evening, I rebuilt the fence she'd measured by heart. Hammer, nail, silence. The sky turned the color of forgiveness, faint, impossible to hold. When the last board settled, I sat on the porch with the rose cutting beside me. I whispered something I hadn't dared before. "May, if you're out there, this land's still yours. I'll keep it standing till you come back, or till it forgives us both." The wind shifted then, soft, carrying the smell of salt and sage. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't nothing either. As darkness bled across the flats, the rose petals quivered, catching the last red light of day. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. I felt like one waiting for peace, not permission. The second night back, the wind shifted again, dragging a colder breath out of the north, and with it a smell that didn't belong to the Flats River mud, wet cedar, the iron tint of scraped rock. I'd been sleeping light on the parlor floor, with the rose cutting in a jar by the window, and when the scent found me, I woke like a man hearing his name through a wall. I took a lantern, a rope, and the mule that still answered to anyone who sounded tired. The sheriff had pointed downstream, said the floodwater cut new channels through the gypsum and left caves where there hadn't been caves. Water is a stubborn teacher. It keeps rewriting the lesson until you learn. The river was quieter than the papers made it. It held its damage close, whispering it through snags of driftwood and low banks of silt. I walked a long mile, then another, lantern making a small yellow lie of safety in front of me. In places, the salt had recrystallized into white ribs. In others, the earth sagged, a belly bruise from within. Somewhere in all that was a woman who had spent her years being braver than anyone bothered to admit. I found the opening where the world had caved. The flood had knifed through a seam, hollowed out a pocket under the salt bed, then pulled the ceiling down when it got bored. From the lip of the sink, I could hear water ticking, the slow kind that eats time for breakfast. I tied the rope off to a cottonwood whose roots had learned to grip like prayer, and I went down. It smelled like a cellar dream, cool, damp, old. My lantern spread itself over slick walls and discovered a path shaped by accident. I followed it, listening for anything that wasn't water. A cough, a whisper, even the mean sound of a body moving over stone. When I finally heard it, I thought at first it was the lantern sputtering. Then the sound repeated, softer but stubborn. "May," I said. The cave gave my voice back to me, thinner. I went on, bent at the waist, palms smudged with salt and clay. Around a low bend, the world opened enough for a person to live inside it. She was there, half sitting against a wall, one boot off, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes wide in a face drained to the color of the ground. "You again," she said, and the dry humor in it hit me harder than a scream. "I figured the sheriff would bring a hymn before he brought a rope." I dropped to my knees, set the lantern so the light wouldn't blind her. "You hurt?" She nodded toward her ankle. "Twisted. Pride's worse." Her voice trembled once and then remembered itself. "I came to see what the water took. It took me." I checked the joint. my hands careful in a way I'd forgotten they could be. Can you stand if I give you a lie to lean on? Don't sell me nothing you can't carry, she whispered. We tried. The ankle screamed and she bit the inside of her mouth to keep the sound from getting loose. I slid my shoulder under her arm, looped the rope around her waist, then mine. The climb would be ugly. Sometimes mercy is. Before we moved, her hand found my sleeve. Caleb, I'm here. You didn't sign, she said. I kept thinking that you didn't sign, and I couldn't decide if I was angry you left or grateful you didn't let me turn us into a contract. I swallowed the answer I'd built for leaving, the one made of excuses and clean lines. I came back, I said. That's the truth I've got. We climbed, inch, breath, inch. The rope bit. The lantern threw our shadows up the wall where they looked like different people stronger, maybe kinder. Halfway up, she shook with the kind of tired that comes from bone, and I braced us against a ledge that wasn't built to hold anyone. Say something mean, she hissed through her teeth, so I can hate you long enough to make it. I can't, I said, almost laughing. I used it all up on myself. She spit grit and nodded. That'll do. When we broke the rim, the night had grown teeth. Wind ran cold fingers through the cottonwood, and stars had gathered like witnesses. I lowered her onto the grass, wrapped my coat around her shoulders, and set the lantern beside us. We sat with our backs to the earth we'd crawled out of, and listened to the river go about its business like we hadn't survived it. I was wrong, she said after a while, voice low as prayer. About what quiet costs. Thought if I could buy it, it'd be mine. Turns out it won't stay if it isn't chosen. I looked at her hands scraped, strong, open. I was wrong about freedom, I said. Thought it was distance. Turns out it's peace you can carry into the same room as your name. Her head tipped toward me. So, what do we call this? Two fools admitting they built wrong? We call it a start, I said. If you want it. She let out a breath that sounded like something breaking and something healing at the same time. I want it, she said. But not by owning, not by hiding. No more contracts to keep people out and pain in. If you stay, it's because you choose mourning with me. If you go, it's because you must. Either way, I'm done using ink to make fear behave. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter her husband had written, folded soft with rereads. I set it between us. He asked you not to prove alone forever, I said. Maybe we give him that. Not for his sake, for ours. She looked at the letter like a door she could finally walk past. I'm sorry, she said, and the word cost her. You could hear the coin it took. For trying to build a person the way I build a fence. I'm sorry, I answered. For leaving when staying scared me more. I took her hand. It was cold and sure. No contracts. But there's paper I'll sign. Her mouth made a question. Deed amendment, I said. 2 names, 1 land. Not because I'm a brace, because I'm a partner. Her eyes filled and then didn't spill. They learned the trick of holding. You don't want my money. I want your mornings, I said, and the work, and the right to fail at both and try again. She laughed. A small, astonished sound. You always talk like a man who lost a war and kept the best part of losing. The part where you stop lying about what you need, I said. Yeah, I kept that. We moved before the cold could stiffen us into statues. I made a travois from branches and shirt sleeves and stubbornness and hauled her back toward Tumbleweed 1 yard at a time. The mule bore witness. The river kept our secret. The sky turned the color of a bruise healing. At the house, I carried her over a threshold that had never been used for romance and set her on the longest couch in the world. I made tea nobody asked for, and we drank it like ceremony. When I checked the greenhouse at dawn, the rose had opened 2 new petals, each thin as promise. I cut 1 bloom, brought it inside, and set it in a jar on the table, next to the unsigned marriage contract we hadn't burned yet. She looked from the jar to the paper to me. You do the honors, she said. I tore the contract in half, then in quarters, feeding it to the stove like a bad winter gone at last. When the ashes sighed down, there was a lightness in the room I had never felt there, as if the house itself had unclenched a fist. We rode to town that afternoon. The sheriff met us on the courthouse steps with an expression that couldn't tell if it was relief or disappointment. The councilman with the steepled fingers asked for documentation. May handed him a single page. It wasn't a license, It was a partnership deed. 2 names. Joint stewardship. Equal vote on everything that mattered and nothing that didn't. This ain't a family paper, he said, flustered. It's better, May answered. It's a peace paper. The preacher hovered at the door, smelling of piety and mothballs. And what of righteousness? He asked, half to us and half to the room he mistook for God. May leaned on her cane, ankle wrapped, eyes bright with the kind of fury that saves. We're going to tend what we've been given, she said. The land, the workers, and each other. If you need more righteousness than that, bring a shovel. Laughter rolled down the hallway from people who had forgotten they knew how. The sheriff hid a smile in his collar. The Chronicles man wrote fast and then slower, as if his hand had remembered compassion. On the way home, the wind blew warm for the first time since the flood, laying the salt flat like a sheet turned down on a bed ready for sleep. May's hat sat low. My hand found the small of her back when the horse stumbled. At the gate, we stopped without planning to, the place where choices like to come back and test their own strength. We still don't belong to each other, she said. No, I said. We belong with each other. She nodded, a quiet that meant yes. Behind us, the house waited with its tender ghosts. Ahead, the work waited with its honest mercies. A hawk cut the sky clean. The mule brayed like a fool who somehow understood. And somewhere in the middle of all that ordinary, a man who had spent half his life running finally put both feet down and heard the sound they made on a porch that didn't ask him to be anything but true. Power can buy quiet, but not belonging. We had stopped buying. Freedom can be distance, but peace is a place you carry into the same rooms as your name. We had stopped leaving. The reckoning wasn't thunder or law. It was a lamp lit in daylight, a page rewritten without ink, and the simple ache of 2 people deciding, at last, to stand. Morning came slower in the weeks that followed, as if the sun itself had learned to take its time crossing tumbleweed. The air smelled less of salt now, more of damp wood and turned soil. The flood had redrawn the map, rivers had changed their minds, fences lay somewhere beneath the sand, but maybe that was Mercy's way of saying you can start again if you're brave enough to rebuild. May Delaney walked with a cane now, said the limp gave her character. Said the town needed something new to talk about anyway. She was half right. They still talked, but the tone had changed. Not pity. Not scandal. Just curiosity, the softer kind, born when people remember they too have sinned and survived. The ranch came back to life piece by piece. New fences, new hands, new laughter carried from the bunkhouse at night. The salt beds gleamed clean under the morning light, their surface smooth as peace. We'd marked the deed together, 2 names, 1 land, and every time I signed a shipment slip or bank paper, my hand hesitated a second, just to feel the weight of that equality. Some evenings, she and I would sit on the porch, boots off, the horizon melting into gold. She'd ask about Red Rock, about the captain I left. I'd tell her, one memory at a time, the parts that didn't rot me to say out loud. She'd listen without fixing it, and that, somehow, was better than forgiveness. Once, I asked her if she ever missed the sound of being feared. She smiled, slow and small. Fear kept me company, she said, but it never stayed for supper. We didn't call it love. Not out loud. Love was too fragile a word for what we'd built something sturdier, quieter, more honest. Maybe love is what happens when 2 people finally stop needing to win. The rose in the greenhouse bloomed wild that spring. No rose, no order, just a riot of red against white salt. May said we should cut them and sell them in town. I said we should let them grow until the wind took their scent farther than gossip ever could. Some nights, I'd wake to the sound of rain and realize it no longer sounded like threat. Just weather, just life reminding itself to begin again. We built a sign at the front gate, carved from driftwood salvaged after the flood. It read, 2 names, 1 land. Beneath it, May added a smaller line in her uneven hand. Peace, if you're willing to work for it. People stopped to read it. Some scoffed, some smiled. But a few, the ones who'd been hurt and stayed standing, touched the wood like it was a prayer. On the first clear night of summer, the sky burned with stars sharp enough to cut through memory. May leaned her cane against the porch rail, folded her arms, and said, You ever think we'd make it this far? I took off my hat, let the wind run through what was left of my hair, and said, No, but I think we finally stopped running the wrong way. Ember. She laughed not loud, but deep, the kind that warms the bones. And for a long while after that, neither of us spoke. The land didn't need words, the land already knew. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote sang. The sound rolled across the flats, thin and lonely, but it didn't ache anymore. It just belonged. And in that quiet, I understood. This was our reckoning, not punishment, not penance, but permission. Permission to stay, to rebuild, to be human again. Maybe that's what this land keeps trying to tell us, that peace isn't a place you find. It's something you learn to keep alive, one quiet act at a time. May and I built fences, but not to keep people out, just to hold the wind steady long enough to breathe. If this story found a small corner of your heart tonight, let it stay there a while. Tell me, what does freedom mean to you? Running or staying? Because out here, under all this open sky, we're all still learning which kind of silence we can live with. If you'd like more stories like this, stories about mercy, redemption, and the human kind of strength, stay a while. Subscribe to Noni Wild West Saga.